Ananim, ¿cómo está? And hello from Grace Daily, hosted by Grace International Baptist Church here in Chuk. Glad to have you here with us today. Today, the text that we'll be looking at that will be coming up on this coming Sunday. Today, we'll be reading Philippians chapter 1, verse 15. It says this: "Some indeed preach Christ, even of envy and strife, and some also of goodwill." Growing up, we had these candies called Warheads, and they were extremely sour, and they're really popular, especially when I was around 6th and 7th grade, 5th, 6th, 7th grade. They were really popular, and you could get all kinds of different flavors, but the main flavors were black cherry and lemon, but lemon was the absolute most sour. And the challenge, especially sad to say during church, but even after church, the challenge was to see how many you could put into your mouth, or or just if you could put it in your mouth without making any kind of a face. And it was hard, especially with the lemon ones. If you put one or two in your mouth, usually it was enough to make your face pucker up, from how sour they were. And believe it or not, Paul warns us about warhead Christians today, about people that have a sour face and that are just grumpy about things. And so we're going to look at three different Greek words today. First, we're looking at phthanon. Okay, that's a hard one to say. It's phthanon, or that would be envy. Then we're looking at Aaron, which is strife. And then finally, we're looking at eudokion, which is goodwill. And these all come out of verse 15 of Philippians chapter 1. Now that we know how much of a bulldog, right? We do know how much of a bulldog that Paul was when it came to defending the purity of the gospel, right? In Galatians, in Ephesians, in Romans, even later on in Philippians, as we'll see, Paul has some extremely strong words about people that he knows to be distorting the truth of the gospel. He calls them wolves, and he calls them a lot of things that we would consider like a mean name. Paul goes after them and he says, these guys are no good. But that's not the case here in our text today. Believe it or not, they're actual, genuine, gospel-preaching Christians that were preaching the truth, but they were preaching it in order to hurt Paul. So let's take a quick look at our words real quick. The first word, phthanon, is the very word for envy, and it's used 9 times throughout the New Testament. Significantly, it's found in the list of what we can call the anti-fruit of the Spirit. So if you go to Galatians chapter 5 and you look toward the end, you'll find the fruit of the Spirit. Right before that, you'll find the fruit of the flesh, or as we'll call it here, the anti-fruit of the Spirit. In Galatians 5:20, it says, "But if you be led of the Spirit, you are not under the law." Now, these works of the flesh are manifest, which are these: adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies, envyings, murders, drunkenness, revelings, and such like. Of the which I tell you before, as I have also told you in time past, that they which do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of God. This word for envy simply means jealousy, envy, spite. And Jesus said that he was delivered up by the Pharisees and by the priests because of their envy towards him. But here Paul is also saying that there were people, Christians, that were envious of him, and so they were preaching to try to take away some of his fame. But Aaron, the word Aaron, is also found 9 times in the New Testament, and it is also in the anti-fruit of the Spirit passage that we just read, and it was strife was the word I believe that we saw in that passage. And people were preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ, the truth, in order to cause strife with Paul. But then finally, there was the preachers that preached with eudokion, and this is interesting. It means goodwill. And this is also found 9 times in the New Testament. Now, I don't know if there's a significance or a correlation between them all only appearing 9 times. I kind of doubt it, but I find it interesting. They're not extremely popular words to use, but they were each used a handful of times to get the meaning of them. But this thing, eudokion, it's often ascribed to the kind of desire that God has for us. God's good desire, his eudokion, is where eudokion appears most of the time. So you had this group of people that were preaching because they were filled with God's good desire. And so the thought for today is simple. We've got two kinds of people, right? You have the people that were preaching from envy and from strife, and these were Christians. They were preaching the gospel. Paul would have called it out otherwise and said, hey, they're preaching a false gospel. But instead, Paul simply tells us, no, these guys are preaching the gospel. They're preaching Christ out of envy and strife. And so my question for us today, there's that kind of Christian that's serving the Lord out of envy and strife. And then you have the eudokion Christian. You have the warhead Christian walking around with a sour face and trying to distort the image of other people. Or you have the eudokion Christian that's filled with the likeness of Jesus Christ. And so my question then for us to examine ourselves today, what kind of Christian are we and why are we serving in the way that we are? Are we a sour Christian that does things that are good, but for the wrong reasons? Or do you have a good will? Do you serve out of the good will of Jesus Christ? Living a life that equals Christ should put us into this second category. So what kind of face are you making today? Grace and peace, my friends.